Hey, welcome to Calgary Basement Sessions. I'm Ben Price.
I'm Ben Montgomery.
And today we're talking to Logan Douglas. Logan is a Canadian folk singer who takes you through a cold mountain tunnel and across a rickety, rotting rail trestle. His particular brand of dark railroad blues reminds us that the American song tradition is very much alive and well out here in the northern frontier.
Hi Logan, how are you?
Good guys, how are you?
Good, yeah, good, thank you.
thank you.
Good. How's your day been so far?
Well, I woke up about an hour ago.
Oh, fantastic.
That's a good day.
Typical musician, man.
Well, it's quarantine, as long as
Yeah,
I
what
can
else?
do in the mornings.
What else is there to do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nothing. Wicked. Well, thanks so much for being on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, well, we look forward to actually having you here when you
Yeah.
can come, but
Exactly.
in the meantime, this will do.
Yeah, well, everyone's kind of... I had a couple jam plans, a couple live shows that were canceled. I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'll just work on myself, however that works.
Nice.
Some meditating. I'm gonna get into some meditation, man.
Yeah, meditation,
Yeah,
sure.
meditation. I'm gonna get like I've got yoga mats and stuff. I'm definitely gonna get into
He
it.
can use it.
Awesome, man. Awesome. So you sent us a bunch of stuff. It looks like you have a bunch of albums as well. 2020, 2019, 2018, 2017.
Yeah, I was for a long time very much like a backing musician for people. I play guitar or bass for different bands and just was I was at school, I went to college in Ottawa and kind of that's where I really found music. And 2017 was around the time that like one of my bands that had been in for a while broke up and I was kind of just looking for a project and I sat down to record for a weekend and that was what the first album came out of. And it was like, all right, well, I guess I'm doing this for a bit now. And then I keep wanting to take a break from it. And then it's like, all of a sudden 20 songs. I'm like, well, I guess I should fucking record some of these, shouldn't I?
Wow, that's insane.
So, I mean, it comes out of places where I'm just like out of boredom or between other projects, between doing shows or doing kind of small tours or whatever. And I just will come out of like, I need to do something and go in the studio for a month or whatever and just bang some stuff out and kind of the different sounds. The most recent one was with Lewis Hayes from Germany, which was a lot of fun. That one. I think Ben, you met him at a show and super fun to play with him, but he's gone back to Germany now. So.
I went to Germany. How long were you in a band with him for?
Well, it kind of started weird. We met in Banff when we were both living out there. My singer of the band I was in was living with him for like 2 weeks at one point, like crossover between she was moving out and he was moving in. And he came to one of our shows. She brought him down, met him. We just clicked, like we hit it off. And then I had some shows booked in Calgary that I needed a band for, needed another guitar player. So I booked him just as like a session guitar player to come and play with us. And then we hit it off really well playing together and jamming. So we ended up just doing stuff as a band after that singer left. And then kind of the band ended up breaking up. And then it was just, all of a sudden it was just me and him. And that continued for a while. So it kind of was like a weird, it's like what we call it, serendipitous moment of like coming together of us just playing together and realized that our styles worked really well. And we were like, all right, well, let's do an album and let's play some shows and let's book all this stuff. So.
That's fantastic. So, like, so you both wrote the music for this album, yeah?
Yeah. So about half of it was, one third I would say was songs he'd written on his own. 1/3 was songs I'd written, and then a couple songs that we'd co-written together. But for the most part, it's both of us playing on everything live. We just basically sat in my studio and mic'd everything and played through the songs. I think there's only one song that has any kind of overdubs on it.
Wow.
Everything else is just live off the floor, which is how I usually like to record it as much as I can. And with how we sing and how we play, it just worked really well. So we kind of followed that approach for most of it.
That's becoming a lot more popular, like sort of recording live off the floor type feel. It's just a lot more raw, a lot more natural. You know, like, you get a lot of like pop music these days where it's very much produced, very much like perfect, on point, you know, and that's not what what music is, really. Music is, you know, it's about pulling and pushing and the connection between the musicians, you know. So recording live off the floor I feel is a lot more popular these days, you know.
I think it's on the rise for sure. I think it's becoming, with the resurgence of kind of the DIY approach to music, the way that makes sense if you don't know anything about production is put a mic in front of it and play it, right? Like that. If you don't know anything about production or don't know how to use like a DAW really advanced and do all this multi-tracking and quantizing drums, like it really is the way that makes sense, is just mic it and play the song. And I feel like that's why it's becoming more popular. It requires a lot less work, I find, especially if you're playing when in the mixing stages, everything's recorded together and you're not going for a super clean sound. It ends up being you get a lot of bleed between microphones and instruments, and that creates a warmth to it that just, you don't have to do a lot of mixing if you set things up right or have a good sounding room and good sounding instruments. It'll sound good on its own. You don't have to do a whole lot of tweaking to things.
Yeah.
So for you two as musicians, do you find that because it's a lot easier now with, I mean, the programs that are even available free on, if you have a Mac, you have GarageBand, and if you have Windows, what would you have, like Audacity or something?
Audacity's the big one.
Yeah. So do you find that there's a lot more, I don't want to say garbage, but a lot less, like good quality music out there because people can just plug in and play and release whatever they want?
I mean, I personally think it's a good thing to an extent. I think the music and the internet has made things very oversaturated. Like it is definitely hard to stand out and get success, if you want to define it like that. But I think that it also is good because there's no one looking over your shoulder saying, is that good or is that bad? People are just releasing things and it can stand on its own, and there might be a market for it. Someone might enjoy that. There's a lot of great recordings that I hear from either local people here in Calgary or people I know from traveling and playing music that just have side projects of something I would call it weird psychedelic crap that like it's awesome, and it's like you would never hear it on the radio because it's just not commercialized or not enough that someone would be like, it's not a cohesive song, but it's really cool to listen to and appreciate from an artistic standpoint. I feel like we're very much in that renaissance of anyone can do anything and no one's going to tell you can't. Right. And that can be good or bad depending on how you look at it. But
I mean, the amount of technology as well that we have nowadays is pretty incredible. You can get free plugins, free downloads that, back in the 70s and 80s you'd pay thousands of dollars for, I just think the technology now is just far more advanced, and you can get much better sound quality, much better microphones. You can buy a $50 microphone that is fantastic. It can work really, really well. Yeah, this one exactly. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's just the technology is just so much more advanced and stuff. So you can as you said, you can literally just get one microphone, plug in and play, and it sounds fantastic. It sounds great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really, I mean, I think for me, I'm sure it's different for you as a drummer, but for me as a guitar player, like there's a lot of songs, especially me and Lewis, like there were times that we put two condenser mics. It's just a big room sound, and it's not a lot of like difference between vocals versus guitar, where I can just put a microphone on my desk and play a song for like a recording of a demo or even just sometimes the final track, and it sounds fine. With drums, you kind of do need a little bit, there's more to it. It's a bigger instrument to mic and kind of just go. Yeah. But yeah, like it's so easy and so affordable to go out and buy a cheap microphone and a cheap interface and record an album in your basement as a guitar player or as a singer or whatever, and do that. And you don't even have to be able to play an instrument now. You can use tracks built in. You can build tracks in Cubase or build tracks in Logic or whatever it is you're using without knowing how to play a physical instrument. You can learn via that interface and learn how to play those. And that's a whole different world that opens up of people with that aren't able to learn instruments or never had the chance to buy a guitar. Like that, not everyone has the means to go out and buy an instrument. Like they're not necessarily cheap to buy something good. Yeah. So it can be hard to like get into that. And I feel like it's broken down those walls of almost like there's an investment to go into it, and that investment's a lot smaller now to just go into making music. You can do it. Anyone can do it. Right? And I think that's good for music in my opinion. But.
And I think that the most creative people, isn't these big like producers and songwriters and for film and stuff. It's going to be like a kid with a laptop in a basement that is just experimenting with everything he can get his hands on.
Yeah.
That's where the creativity is, and it's literally just from a laptop, from Logic, from Pro Tools, from Cubase, wherever. It's being as creative as possible with the resources that you have, and the resources that we have nowadays cost nothing, you know.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
so easy to get into it. I think that like some of my favorite producers, not counting like local people that I know, because there's a couple that I would consider my favorite producers that I know, but those guys, the guys that I really like, and the guys that I have their names on big records, are the guys that don't approach things from a traditional standpoint and do things in a different way and interesting.
Yeah.
One of the great examples, I really like Butch Walker, who's kind of he's more of a songwriter than a producer or an artist, but every single album he does for his solo stuff is different. Like it's like, because he makes his money and all that from producing and songwriting.
Mm-hmm.
So when he does an album, it's like, I want to do this, and he'll do something different. And the next album, he's like, I want to do something like this, and it's completely different. He doesn't have a sound that is universal to him.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really cool. And his production stuff, like he has his name on everything from like Pink to Fall Out Boy to random rock beat. Like it's cool that he does whatever he feels like working on. I feel like that's the way to approach music, is something that it should, each project's different. And the internet and technology has made it good that like for a long time there was the sound that people went after. It's like that was the sound of a hit record. We don't really have that as much anymore. It's kind of, the sound is ever changing and it's never going to be one thing anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned your albums and stuff. Did you record your albums yourself, or did you go into a studio and record them, or what did you do?
They've been different kind of places each time.
Mm-hmm.
The first one was just in my basement that I was living at the house in Ottawa at the time, with, I think like I did an AT2020 and a SM58 was all I had at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and recorded the whole album with that. And there's some keyboard overdubs in there and some other stuff, but it's mostly just guitar and vocals.
Mm-hmm.
But the second one, I got a lot more experimental. It was recorded in my living room at a different house that I was living in, because I bounce around a lot. Musicians do when you're living in a city like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, like recorded in my living room slash bedroom slash wherever I kind of set up at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that one kind of incorporated a lot of different ideas of garage and different stuff. And I had a friend come in and do help with all of the mixing and engineering on that one too, that he just knew a lot more than I did
Mm-hmm.
at the time. And I learned a lot from him on stuff too, but just that kind of atmosphere of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third one, the process for that one I think was my favorite. That was my like third solo, just by myself. And we went out, me and my my current one of my current roommates actually went to her cabin up by Red Deer, up in Gull Lake there,
Mm-hmm.
and went up just for 2 weeks, like locked, completely in isolation, like no phones, no internet, nothing, and just recorded. And that one was definitely like, sounds the most folk by sure, because it's just me by myself in a cabin recording.
Yeah, yeah. You hear a bunch of these stories of bands that they just lock themselves away in like Hawaii or Alaska or whatever, and they just write an album. They spend a year writing an album, and it's incredible music, really incredible. Didn't Rush do that? Didn't Rush like lock themselves away or something?
Rolling Stones did that. The Beatles did that. I mean, Zeppelin did that. And I think some of the best albums come out of that, like when you have no distraction, nothing to do, and just kind of sit in a cabin or wherever in isolation and record. I mean, Nirvana in utero, they went up to some up in Washington. They went up to a cabin and recorded that entire album just with no distractions, no one around. And that's one of their more interesting, diverse records, I think, and that's kind of why, is they wanted to get away from the Nevermind sound and just record something different that was back to like what the band actually sounds like, not just the commercial aspect of it.
Mm-hmm. So you said you went to school in Ottawa. Was that you studied music, I guess, yeah?
Kind of. I have a very mixed up kind of, my transcripts in school history is a little finicky. So high school was the start of it. I went first year of high school here in Calgary, and then lived in Dubai for a year, went to school there, and then lived in Ottawa and did my final year and a bit of school in Ottawa. But I never actually graduated high school. So it's kind of I just at one point stopped going because I was living alone and working full time and was like, I don't have time for this. And I went did some college courses in direct entry to that. So I took some performing arts courses, and then some music production courses, and then also some security courses. That was a whole other thing too, though. Just because I was like, I wanted to learn. I didn't really care about getting a degree. I just wanted to learn how to do things. So I still to this day don't have a full degree in anything, but I've just taken courses in different things to learn different skills. And then once I got the skills I wanted to learn, I was like, all right, cool, I'm gonna go do my own thing now.
Wow. What was Dubai like?
Interesting. It's very different from here. It's I compare Dubai a little bit to Banff. When I was living there, it felt very similar. Not necessarily in the culture of the place, but in the people, because it's both cities are very transient. Dubai has people coming through, especially when you're a Westerner or expat. They have you're no one's there permanently, right? Everyone knows that they're only there for a little couple years and they're leaving because that's what it is. You go there, and especially when you're in high school, like you're there for your parents' work. You're not there because you're there to do anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
So people have that mentality. There's a lot of like Western Europeans. Most of my friends were English or Scottish or French. Like that was just predominantly who I hung out with and people. I think at my school there was like one other Canadian, and she was born in Canada but raised in England, so it's like not really a Canadian.
Yeah. Half a
But yeah, I
Canadian.
mean, yeah, it's half Canadian citizenship, but didn't sound Canadian at all. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. I still like some of my best friends in the world I met there and still hang out with, and we're not all scattered across the world. Like I have friends in all across the states going to school or all across Europe that if I ever do a trip over there and visit, like I know so many people from just all being in one spot for a period that now they're gone back to their home countries. So it's really cool to have that experience, and I think that it kind of forced me to grow a lot and experience a lot of the world and just be open to different cultures and different people and different ways of thinking of things.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, yeah. And you moved back to your living on like you moved back to Banff, didn't you, after Dubai, or did you go to back to Auckland?
So Banff came. I moved to Ottawa again for my mom's work. So we were sent to Dubai for her work, and then after Dubai, we went to Ottawa for her work, and then that's where I moved out. So I moved out in Ottawa, and then she moved back to Calgary.
Right.
And then I stayed in Ottawa for probably about 5 years. I think I was there. And then when I came back, I moved back to Calgary, and I was here for maybe a summer, and then a job in Banff kind of fell into my lap. It was an old family friend was hiring front desk for the hotel she was the general manager at, and fell into my lap, and I was like, well, I'll go experience Banff for a bit, and then kind of fell in love. Like Banff is such an interesting town.
Banff is beautiful.
There's so much to do there, and like when you're a local there and you experience that, it's really interesting. The music scene there is very, very different than anything else I've experienced. Because when you grow up in like Calgary or Ottawa, big cities like Toronto or Montreal, it can be very competitive. Of people kind of like people are competing for shows or competing for whatever, right? Like it's not everyone, but it can be competitive. Banff doesn't have that at all because the music scene's not big enough to be competitive. There's more bars and more music venues than there are bands to fill them. So it's the opposite of competitive because no one's competing. You're all just kind of doing our own thing together.
Do you find that changes with the seasons? Does it become more competitive in the summer or high tourist season than it is in the winter?
Yes and
with
no.
outside bands, I guess.
Outside bands for sure, but there's a lot of there's a split between bars that will have outside bands come in, and then those bars that don't ever have outside bands come in. So there's definitely locals bars, and I think of like Bruno's, which is actually closing unfortunately, but Bruno's being a locals bar, kind of Mel's being another locals bar there that doesn't really have a lot of out of town bands come through. Tommy's, and then you have like the Rose and Crown and Wild Bills. That those are the way the out of town bands come through and play those places. So it's kind of a difference. There's not a lot of crossover there. Not a lot of locals bands play Wild Bills or Rose and Crown because they fill up the schedule with out of town bands, with a few exceptions. I mean, like there's a couple guys that do play those bars, but they're the guys that play them regularly, right? But I feel like it can get bigger. The town almost triples in size come the summer, just with people in it, and locals too, for people coming for the seasonal work. But with that, the musicians that come to town are, I don't want to disparage anyone by saying this, but it does a little bit sound like I am. They're musicians who come through and they're capable musicians, but that's not their full-time job, right? So I never found that competitive with them because it's those bar gigs that you're playing for 4 hours and doing cover shows. Like the guys that come through that aren't full-time musicians can't do those. They just don't have enough material to fill 4 hours on stage. So I mean, it was competitive in that sense, but I still felt like there was always a niche of people who were there regular. And once you're there and once you're in with that scene and you have your regular like people you go through, you're not struggling anymore. Like you're good. You're set up with that. And that kind of it sets itself there that you don't have to fight for gigs anymore. And that's the thing I love about it. It's like I didn't feel like anyone was competing. Anytime I had a show or anytime my friend had a show and we'd go, or anytime someone else got something, it felt like I was just supporting them by going, and it didn't have to be, oh, that person got this gig. What am I going to do for food this week? Or I need to get a gig. I need to play some shows. I need to fight with someone else and prove I'm better. That doesn't exist there because everybody's struggling and nobody cares about money.
The music scene in Glasgow is very much like that. It's very, very competitive, and you know, when you go see a show that your friends in and stuff like that, obviously it's great to see them in that show, but you know, the back of your head you're like, oh man, how did he get that gig, how did she get that gig?
Yeah.
You know, and everyone is very much a network community. Everyone's like, oh, I know this guy, or he does this for such and such, you know. It's very, very competitive, and to get a good solid regular gig you need to wait for someone to die, basically, you know.
Yeah, no, I that's what Ottawa to an extent, but definitely like Toronto and Montreal are heavily like that. Like those music scenes, I know people that live there and have competed in those music scenes, and it's so difficult to get anywhere and just be able to do what you love. And I don't feel like being able to play shows or write music or play with people should be something you have to fight for. I feel like it should just be something that you can do, and it be able to support yourself doing this. I mean, Calgary is interesting for that. We have a great scene of people that do this full time. I mean, you guys being a great example, you guys do this pretty much full time. I know we both do side things, and Nova Scotia being another great example. Like AJ and Haji and those guys, they do this full time. They don't do anything except music, right? They just travel around and play music. And there's a lot of those bands here. And Calgary is one of the first cities I've lived in that actually has a large community of regular full-time musicians outside of like Halifax or New York, right? Yeah. Versus like Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa, and even Vancouver to an extent. Those cities, like, you can't support yourself just doing music. You have to do a bunch of other things because there's just not enough work. Everyone's competing for, and there's not enough work for you to support yourself doing just that.
Yeah. I mean, we interviewed Cam Bowie, a session musician from Calgary, and he's a full-time musician. You know, he's a session guy. He's a session keyboard player. He plays with everyone under the sun in this city, and he also works at Studio Bell, you know, the National Music Centre and stuff. So he's got a job in music, and he also plays a shit ton of music as well. You know, so he's living the life for sure. You know, and I know I've only been here like 8 months. You know, I already know like a bunch of great session musicians, you know, and that's all they do is they just play and they record, and and it's really, really inspiring to see, you know, because people say the music industry's dead, the music industry's dying and stuff like that. It's really not. There's still a lot of work going around, you know. You just need to, work for it, you know.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing is I think it's not dead. It's just it's changed. It's not the same as it used to be. Like I think going out and doing things, or even like we have such a community here in Calgary of session musicians, and there's some like places like OCL Studios, which I know Cam talked about. Like that place, I don't understand how it functions off Calgary until you look at the session and how many people come here just to record here, right? The people aren't local, and it does have a big session and producer kind of culture here. We're almost like the Nashville of Canada, where it's like it's a lot of songwriters and session musicians and some great studios that don't, but we're not where people come. Like not a lot of musicians come up from Calgary that leave and go and make it big somewhere else. A lot of them stay here and become regular musicians in Calgary or session musicians, right? Versus we have guys from Toronto or Montreal or the States sometimes that come up here and come out here and play and record with people out here. That kind of creates such a good music scene of it. Kind of makes it like we have a top tier musicians living in Calgary here that have no business being in a city like this, that just make it such a cool place to live because you can have this smaller, still kind of rural city that feels like a small city, but has these great artists and great musicians that hang out here and play music out here.
I've never seen so much money put into a city for music, you know, like they revamped King Eddie, OCL Studios, as you mentioned, and then Studio Bell as well, you know, millions and millions, possibly billions of dollars put into this city for music and the arts, you know. It's really fantastic to see, really, really fantastic to see. And compared to back home, you know, in the UK, a lot of places are shutting down. They're not putting as much money into the arts as they were before, you know. And being here and seeing how much they care about the arts and your music and stuff like that, and like creativeness. It's really quite inspiring to see that.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up here in Calgary on Ninth Ave, like in Inglewood. So like what they call Music Mile now, which wasn't Music Mile when I was growing up at all. So I've been fortunate enough to kind of like I grew up like I was born in the late '90s, so I kind of saw that in the early 2000s, like as a kid being the kind of lowest it had been in a long time. Like after the King Eddie had closed, and you had all these bars in Inglewood struggling, and then been able to see that through my teenage years and adulthood, like kind of coming back up and being this people putting money back into it, and like we have so many great venues here now. Like again, the King Eddie, what a great bar that was closed for so long and is now reopened. And as an iconic, like you have people like BB King and Buddy Guy and Bob Dylan played there, like all these legendary artists that had come through here and played in Calgary of all places, right? Like it's so cool to see that and talk about that with people. And then now we have like the Blues Can and Swans and like the Ironwood here in Inglewood. They're all great bars and do open mics so people can go in. Like that's the great thing about those top tier venues that are fantastic sounding rooms that you can just go in and play there on Wednesday nights is the open mic at Ironwood, and like the guys that run that, I've known Tim Leacock for 20 years. He's the guy that runs the open mic there, and like to get up and have real sound guys doing your sound on a real stage with a full sound system for an open mic is unheard of and great experience to have.
Yep.
Like just something that doesn't exist any other bar I've played at or been in.
Yeah. There are so many jam nights around Calgary. I've noticed that, like an incredible amount of jam nights.
Yeah, there is, and there's a lot, and they're usually run by other musicians too. Like they're run by people who know what they're doing, and they're not just the bar owners who are like, okay, yeah, like here's the sound system, go ahead and go. But like even the one actually when we talked about it, the one at Swigs, the Nova Scotia was used to run.
Yeah,
that was a great one. Like small bar out of the way, but like the fact that you have real musicians and giggy musicians running it, that will be a backing band for you, and you can go up and be like, I want to play this, and be like, all right, cool, we'll back you up on it. Like that's so cool to have that experience, to be able to just go play with people like that.
Exactly, yeah. And especially for young musicians as well, that like, you know, maybe don't have the confidence to maybe start a band or whatever like that. Just go along to a jam night and you get to play with different musicians, get to network with musicians, and yeah, it's a fantastic way for young musicians to meet working musicians in the industry, you know.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that wasn't really around when I was growing up and a kid playing music. Like I didn't really find music till I was like 16, 17. I think that like I really started putting my time and soul into it. But there was always a guitar. My dad's a musician. Like there was always a guitar and music around, and I always loved music, but I didn't play it. So I think the big part of that was that there wasn't really an option to. It wasn't like I could just go out and do that. I didn't see it all the time. And now that I see this happening all the time, and I see young kids playing shows and doing all this, and I think it's great. Like they get such a leg up on the industry just starting so much younger.
Yeah.
Right. And doing that and getting the experience of playing with people, and they get those mentors to teach them how to do things and show them like that. That's what makes the music scene continue to grow. And in 10 years, it will be even better than it is now, because those guys will have the time to come up and be that. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just before we wrap up, we're coming to the end here. We want to touch on your new band so we can get some information about that, because we know you have something together with how do you say the last name?
Isley, Jordan.
Isley, okay.
Yeah. So Midnight Tragics, this is kind of an interesting band. Again, it was a similar situation with Lewis, where it was, I brought him in to play drums for a band that I needed. That's kind of always been my role in a lot of bands, especially recently, where like people, I know singers or other people who like want to form a band. They'll be like, all right, well, I'll get to a bass player and a keyboard player and a drummer or whatever, and we'll put this band together for you. And it was the same situation of, I brought him in to play drums for a band I was playing with in Banff. We met out there, and we clicked and kind of just started playing. We did a couple of jams and recording, just the two of us as like a kind of garage rock alternative duo. And then that became a kind of, we started focusing on that, doing live stuff, and then playing that, and then had to take a step back for it because I was busy with other projects, and then he works in finance, so he's been busy and doing some traveling for that before all this happened. And so it's kind of taken a step back, but it's become more or less a studio band where we get together when we can and record, but we're not doing live as much, and we're not planning on doing as much live anymore. It's kind of just become a project for both of us to be like, all right, let's spend a weekend recording some songs and experimenting with stuff. And we actually have a new song coming out for that in the next couple of days here. But it's totally different from the other song we released. It's kind of everything's going to be a little bit different. It's not going to have a universal sound. It's going to be whatever we feel like playing at the time. It's what it's going to sound like. So that's kind of where that came out of, and it's definitely was a Banff band, and is now we both live in Calgary now randomly as well.
That's awesome.
That's fantastic. One last quick question before you go. What is your most memorable show that you've played, either in Calgary, Banff, Ottawa?
That's a hard one. There's a couple. I feel like most memorable. Yeah, okay, I'm going to do this one. We played, this is back in Ottawa when I was living out there, and we did a little mini tour out to Kitchener-Waterloo and played the big music festival out there. And so it was when I was still involved, we didn't talk about this, but I'll briefly talk about it. It was when I was involved in School of Rock. So we actually got to go out there and stay with the other kids. I was like 16, 17 at the time. Got to go and stay with the other School of Rock kids at their school and their studio and like hang out and play music with them. And we actually did a swap bands thing where like half of our band went and played with their band and half of their band came and played with our band.
Wow. And
we just worked out like the day before like what songs we were going to play and what songs we all knew. And that was kind of one of the best experiences of like that shuffle, like two bands that became kind of four different bands playing in front of like 900 people that we'd never played together before yesterday. Yeah. And it was just a lot of fun to have that and it really opened me up to playing with people and being a real musician, being able to like sit in with anybody and just play. Like it opened my eyes to that aspect of it. And then also getting to play like the same stage that like Soundgarden played was cool. So I mean,
that's awesome.
Like a day before Soundgarden, but I still claim we opened for Soundgarden a day before they did. But yeah, that one was definitely one of my big memories on that one.
That's great. And now you're teaching at School of Rock as well?
Yeah. Well, that kind of happened out of nowhere too, but I love that I get to do that and get to have a day job that's around music and associated with that, and working with other musicians is a lot of fun too. And just getting to network and do things like this with those instructors, right?
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thanks for
a
having
lot.
me, guys.
Yeah, it's been awesome. Thank you so much for coming on.
No, thank you. Yeah,
awesome.
When we can get back in the studio and do some live playing, it'll be fun.
100%. Fantastic. Right. Well, thank you very much, and we'll speak to you later on.
All right. Have a good day, guys.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.